"The house is our wedding gift to your sister," my father announced at the reception. They showed up with movers the next day, but I was gone. My lawyer was waiting with an eviction notice for them. The soul of a house isn't in its beams or its foundation. It's in the layers of memory pressed into the walls, the scent of 1,000 meals cooked in the kitchen, the worn spot on the floor where someone always stood to look out the window. My house had a soul, and I knew it intimately because I had spent the last decade of my life saving it. It was a craftsman, built in the 1920s with a wide, welcoming porch and deep eaves that seemed to sigh with the wisdom of a century. This was the house I grew up in, but it hadn't truly felt like mine until I bought it from my own parents 10 years ago. It wasn't a gift or a privileged inheritance. It was a rescue mission. My father, Richard, a man whose dreams were always bigger than his bank account, had driven his latest business venture into the ground, and the foreclosure notice was a stark, ugly stain on their perfect suburban facade. I was 28, an architect just starting to find my footing. I drained my 401k, took out a mortgage that made me physically nauseous, and handed my parents a check that saved them from ruin. They took the money, moved into a smaller, more manageable home across town, and the narrative was set. Anna, our responsible, wonderful daughter, is taking care of the old family home for us. They never used the word bought. They never used the word saved. It was always taken care of. But I did more than take care of it. I resurrected it. I spent weekends stripping paint from the original fireplace mantel, my fingers raw, until the rich, dark grain of the oak emerged like a long-held secret. I learned how to reglaze the original wavy glass windows, preserving the way they made the afternoon light dance across the floor. This house wasn't just my address. It was my sanctuary, my life's work, and my biggest financial burden. Every bonus I ever received, every vacation I never took, was absorbed into its bones. New wiring, a stable foundation, a roof that didn't leak. My intelligence, however, wasn't limited to blueprints. Living in the orbit of my family for 38 years had taught me prudence. On my laptop, nestled among project files and client invoices, was a folder labeled simply House Documentation. Inside, it was meticulously organized, a scanned copy of the deed in my name, every mortgage statement I'd ever paid, PDF receipts for every contractor, every gallon of paint, every custom-milled piece of trim. It wasn't born of paranoia, but of a quiet, deep-seated understanding that with my family, love was often transactional and memory was always negotiable. The first tremor of the earthquake to come arrived on a Tuesday evening in early May. My younger sister, Chloe, and her new fiancé, Mark, were over for dinner. Chloe had always been the golden child, the one whose transgressions were spirited and whose accomplishments, no matter how minor, were celebrated with performative fanfare. She glided through life on a cloud of my parents' adoration, a stark contrast to my own steady, earthbound existence. Mark was her perfect match, handsome, slick, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was an aspiring tech entrepreneur, which in his case seemed to mean he had a great pitch deck and an expensive wardrobe funded by a trust fund. "Oh, Anna, this place is just divine," Chloe said, running a manicured hand over the fireplace mantel I'd spent 6 months restoring. "It has so much character. Mark and I were just saying we could never live in one of those soulless new builds. It's got great bones," Mark added, his eyes scanning the high ceilings and wide doorways with an appraising glint. "The property taxes on a place like this must be insane, though. A real burden for one person." I smiled thinly. "It's manageable." Then, over dessert, Chloe dropped the news. "We're getting married," she announced, flashing a diamond ring that was both enormous and predictable. My parents, of course, were ecstatic. My mother, Carol, a woman who weaponized emotion with surgical precision, was already tearing up. My father was booming about welcoming Mark to the family. And then the pressure started. "Anna, your house would be the absolute perfect place for the wedding," my mother said, her voice thick with manufactured sentiment. "The backyard is a dream. Imagine the photos." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I knew what this meant. It wouldn't just be hosting. It would be an invasion. "Mom, I don't know," I said carefully. It's not really set up for large events. The plumbing is old and— "Oh, don't be so practical," my father cut in. "It's your sister's special day. A wedding here would be a story people tell for years. You wouldn't want to disappoint your only sister, would you, sweetie?" my mother added, patting my hand. There it was, the guilt, wrapped in a silken bow. I held up a hand. "Let me think about it." I felt their collective disappointment, a heavy blanket in the air. I knew I was going to lose this battle, but I was determined not to lose the war. The next day, I sent a carefully worded email to my parents, Chloe and Mark. Subject: wedding reception. Dear all, after giving it some thought, I'd be happy to host Chloe and Mark's wedding reception in the backyard. I'm so excited for you both. To ensure everything goes smoothly, I've outlined a few parameters. Please note that the house interior, except for the downstairs guest bathroom, will be off limits to guests to prevent any accidental damage to the floors and furnishings. All vendor contracts and arrangements must be forwarded to me for final review to coordinate logistics. Looking forward to celebrating with you. Anna. I hit send and leaned back, my heart pounding. It was a reasonable, logical attempt to set a boundary. I was a fool to think it would matter. It was like handing a treaty to a conquering army. They didn't see it as a boundary. They saw it as a suggestion, and a rather inconvenient one at that. The email was my first piece of evidence. I dragged a copy into the house documentation folder. I had a sickening feeling I was going to need it. In the 6 weeks leading up to the wedding, my carefully constructed boundaries were not just crossed. They were bulldozed, paved over, and turned into a parking lot for my family's entitlement. My email was met with a breezy, "Of course, sweetie, whatever you think is best," from my mother, a reply that in our family's language meant, "We will agree to your face and do whatever we want behind your back." It started subtly. My mother arrived one afternoon with the wedding planner, a severe woman with a clipboard and a disdainful expression. I found them in my upstairs master bedroom, discussing where to set up a bridal touch-up station. "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight. I said the interior of the house was off limits. "Oh, Anna, don't be silly," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's just for the bridal party. You can't expect Chloe to touch up her makeup in the guest bathroom. Think of her dress." The following week, I came home from a long day at a construction site to find my favorite armchair, a vintage Eames lounge I had saved for 2 years to buy, missing from the living room. I found it in the garage, covered in a dusty tarp. My father was there, directing 2 men who were moving my dining table. "Dad, what is happening?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Just making some room for the dance floor. Annie girl," he boomed, oblivious. "We'll need this whole area cleared out. Don't worry, we'll put it all back later." He spoke of my cherished possessions as if they were inconvenient clutter. Each incident was a small cut, a reminder that in their eyes, my home was not my own. It was a stage, and I was just the stage manager for the main event, Chloe. The final, sickening confirmation of their intentions came not from them, but through my best friend, Sarah. She had come over 2 weeks before the wedding, ostensibly to help me arrange flowers, but really to provide moral support. As I was in the kitchen wrestling with a catering issue on the phone, Sarah stepped into the garden for some air. She came back inside a few minutes later, her face pale. She closed the kitchen door and spoke in a low, urgent whisper. "Anna, you need to hear this." I was by the rose bushes. I don't think they saw me. It was Chloe and Mark. She took a deep breath. He said, "Once we get the line of credit against the house, my startup is set for the next 5 years. And Chloe," she laughed, "Anna," she said, "just be patient. After Dad makes the announcement, she'll have to give in. It's not like she can make a scene at my wedding. Where would she even go?" The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed out of my lungs, replaced by an icy dread. It wasn't just thoughtless entitlement. It was a plan, a calculated, premeditated scheme to take my home. The years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights worrying about the mortgage, the love I had poured into every floorboard. To them, it was just a line of credit, a financial stepping stone. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The part of me that had always hoped for their love, that had accepted the scraps of their approval, finally died. It was a quiet death, unmourned. It was replaced by something cold, hard, and clear as glass. I looked at Sarah, my expression unreadable. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice unnaturally calm. That night, I didn't cry. I made a new subfolder inside, house documentation. I named it the plan. The wedding day arrived, a beautiful, sun-drenched Saturday in June. My backyard had been transformed into a fairy tale scene with strings of lights, white roses, and a sea of guests in pastel silks and crisp suits. I moved through it all like a ghost, my smile a carefully constructed mask. I was polite, I was gracious, and I was utterly detached. I was watching a play, and I already knew the ending. Then came the toasts. After the best man speech, my father stood up, tapping a knife against his champagne flute. He beamed at the crowd, the picture of the proud patriarch. "Family," he began, his voice resonating with false emotion. "Today, we are not losing a daughter, but gaining a son. Mark, welcome. Chloe, my darling, you have never been more beautiful." He spoke of love, of legacy, of giving your children the best possible start in life. I watched him, feeling nothing but a profound, hollow emptiness. He raised his glass. "And to give Chloe and Mark the best possible start, a foundation as strong and as beautiful as their love, your mother and I have decided to give them a truly special gift." He paused for dramatic effect, turning and gesturing grandly toward the house behind him. This house. A wave of ecstatic applause rolled through the crowd. People were cheering, smiling, some even wiping away tears at the sheer generosity of the gesture. Through the din, I saw my mother dabbing her eyes, a perfect portrait of maternal sacrifice. I saw Mark put his arm around Chloe, whispering in her ear, his eyes gleaming with triumph. And I saw Chloe. She looked directly at me, across the 50 feet of manicured lawn that separated us, and her face held a look of pitying, victorious glee. It was the look of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I didn't make a scene. My reaction was much quieter and infinitely more final. I slowly, deliberately placed my untouched champagne flute on a nearby table. I smoothed the front of my dress, took one last look at the house that was no longer a sanctuary but a crime scene, and I turned. Without a word to anyone, without a backward glance, I walked through the guests, down the stone path, and out the front gate. I got into my car, my hand steady on the wheel. The radio was silent. The streets were quiet. As I drove toward Sarah's house, I felt the last vestiges of the hopeful, compliant daughter I used to be peel away like sunburnt skin. She was gone, and I did not miss her. The night of the wedding, I didn't sleep. I sat on Sarah's couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the city lights. Sarah sat with me, a silent, steady presence, asking nothing, offering everything. The shock had worn off, and what remained wasn't grief. It was a cold, clarifying anger, an anger so pure and so focused it felt like a source of power. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had underestimated me. They saw a doormat. They were about to meet a fortress. The next morning, a Sunday, I was on the phone. By Monday at 9 a.m., I was sitting in the downtown office of David Chun, a lawyer whose reputation preceded him. He was known for being a shark in real estate litigation, particularly in messy, intra-family disputes. He was sharp, impeccably dressed, and had eyes that seemed to see straight through any pretense. "They announced it at the wedding?" he asked, leaning back in his chair after I finished my story. There was no pity in his voice, only a flicker of professional interest that bordered on righteous indignation. "That's bold. Performative, even." I slid my laptop across the polished mahogany table. "I have everything here." I walked him through the house documentation folder, the deed, the mortgage statements, the renovation receipts totaling over $100,000. Then I showed him the email I'd sent, my attempt at setting boundaries. Finally, I told him what Sarah had overheard. David listened, his expression unchanging. When I was done, he nodded slowly. "This is excellent, Anna. You have an ironclad legal claim, but more than that, you have a documented pattern of behavior and premeditated intent. That's crucial." He leaned forward, his voice becoming a calm, strategic guide. "Here's what we're going to do, and here is what they're going to do. Phase 1 is securing the property. Today, we change the locks and post no trespassing signs. Tomorrow, when they inevitably show up with a moving truck, I will be there to meet them. You will not be. Your presence is an emotional lever for them to pull. My presence is a legal brick wall. He paused, holding my gaze. Then comes phase 2, the counterattack. They will not go quietly. They will paint you as the villain, the cold, ungrateful daughter who ruined her sister's honeymoon week. They will call you. They will text you. They will use friends and relatives to guilt you. They may even feign a medical emergency. Your job is to not engage. Not once. You will forward everything to me. Your only defense is the unarguable truth and zero contact. Can you do that? Yes, I said, the word coming out stronger than I expected. I can. Before I left his office, I asked him to wait while I made one more call. I needed to go to the house to retrieve my vital documents and the few sentimental things I couldn't bear to lose. He agreed it was a good idea to do it before the locks were changed. An hour later, I was back in the house. It felt alien, violated. The remnants of the party were everywhere. A stray champagne flute, a few wilting rose petals on the floor. I moved quickly, efficiently. I packed a small box with my passport, my birth certificate, and my laptop. On my way out, I stopped at the attic stairs. There was one more thing. A dusty cardboard box labeled Grandma. I wasn't sure why I grabbed it, only that it felt like a piece of my real history, my true legacy, and I couldn't bear to leave it in this tainted place. That night, at Sarah's apartment, I opened the box. It smelled of lavender and old paper. Inside were photo albums, a few pieces of jewelry, and her diaries. I picked one up, its leather cover cracked with age. Tucked inside the front cover was a folded, yellowed letter. It was addressed to me in my grandmother's elegant, looping script. I was 16 when she died. I'd never seen it before. My dearest Anna, it began. If you're reading this, I am likely gone. There is something I want you to know. This house has a soul, and I believe its soul is connected to yours. You are the only one who has ever truly understood it. Your father, whom I love, sees it as an asset. Your mother sees it as a stage. You see it as a home. It is my deepest wish that one day it will be yours to care for, and that you will find in its walls the peace and strength I have always found. Know that you are loved not for what you do, but for who you are. Tears, hot and silent, streamed down my face. It was a posthumous blessing, a validation that reached across time. I picked up the diary. Flipping through the pages, I found an entry from a year before my parents' financial collapse. November 4th, Richard came to me for another loan. His new venture is failing. I can see it. Carol enables him, always talking about keeping up appearances. I fear they will lose everything. They will see this home not as a legacy, but as an asset to be liquidated for their next grand idea. Only Anna understands its soul. I must find a way to protect her. She had tried. She had known. The betrayal wasn't new. It was a generational sickness. And my grandmother had just handed me the cure. The next morning, Tuesday, my phone rang. It was David. It's done, he said, his voice crisp. They arrived at 10 a.m. sharp. U-Haul truck, the happy couple, and your parents, all ready to move in. What happened? I asked, my heart hammering. They tried the key. It didn't work. They were starting to get angry when I stepped out onto the porch, he said. I could almost hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. I introduced myself. I handed them a packet, a copy of the deed, a formal cease and desist letter, a notice that any attempt to enter the property would be treated as criminal trespassing. I have never seen four faces fall so fast or so far. He continued, your father started blustering about family agreements. Your mother started crying. Chloe screamed that I was a monster and that you were ruining her life. The fiancé, Mark, said nothing at all. He just stared at the house like a man watching his winning lottery ticket burst into flames. They got back in their car and left. The U-Haul followed. A wave of relief, so profound it made me dizzy, washed over me. Thank you, David. We're not done yet, he cautioned. This was just phase 1. Get ready. His warning proved prophetic. That evening, another call came, this time from my Uncle Ben, my father's estranged older brother. He had been at the wedding. Anna, it's Ben, he said, his voice heavy. I saw what Richard did. I'm disgusted. I should have known he'd pull something like this. He sighed. Listen, there's something you should know. Your father has always confused taking with earning. Years ago, he convinced our mother to sign over a small piece of investment property to him that was meant for both of us. He managed it right into the ground, and I never saw a dime. I stayed quiet to keep the peace while she was alive, but I'm done with that. He cleared his throat. But that's not all. I need you to know this wasn't some spontaneous, foolish gesture. At the rehearsal dinner, I overheard Chloe and Mark talking to some friends. They were laughing about their 5-year plan. Get the house, take out a massive line of credit, fund his company. She said, and I quote, Anna will be fine. We'll help her find a cute little condo to rent. They had it all planned. I will testify to that in court if you need me to. My hand tightened on the phone. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This was a conspiracy, and I had my witnesses, I had my evidence, and I had my resolve. The war had just begun. David's prediction of a Phase 2 was an understatement. What my family launched was not a mere counterattack. It was a scorched earth campaign of emotional warfare. They were clumsy, predictable, and utterly relentless. It began with a phone call from a private number 2 days after the confrontation with David. I answered and was met with the sound of my mother's theatrical sobbing. Anna? It's Mom, she wailed. Your father, he's in the hospital. His heart. The doctor said it was this stress you've caused. How would you do this to him? To us. The Anna of a month ago would have buckled. The guilt would have been a physical blow, sending me rushing to the hospital, checkbook in hand, ready to apologize for having the audacity to own what was mine. But David's voice was a cool presence in my mind. They will feign a medical emergency. I'm sorry here he's unwell, Mom, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen lake. I hope he receives the best possible care. There was a stunned silence on the other end, then sputtering rage. Is that all you have to say? Your father could be dying. I've said all I'm going to say. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up before she could respond. A quick search online confirmed my suspicions. The hospital she'd named had no patient by the name of Richard Miller. The lie was as cheap as it was cruel. The next salvo was aimed directly at my sanctuary. I received an automated email from the city utility department. This email confirms your request to disconnect electrical service at 123 Oak Street. They were trying to plunge me into darkness, a petty, vindictive move to assert a control they no longer had. I spent 10 minutes on the phone with a patient customer service representative, emailed her a copy of my deed and driver's license, and had the fraudulent request canceled and a security note added to my account. The light stayed on. Finally, the official-looking email arrived. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, with a letterhead that looked like it was designed in Microsoft Word 97. It was a cease and desist letter addressed to me, full of legal jargon and typos, claiming I was in breach of a binding verbal contract to transfer the house to my sister. It demanded I either vacate the property immediately or wire them $300,000 to compensate for inflicted emotional distress and damages to the newlyweds' future. I read it, and for the first time in days, I laughed. It was a genuine, cleansing laugh. I forwarded the email to David with a simple subject line, Phase 2, as predicted. His reply came an hour later. Anna, this is wonderful. They're panicking. Let me handle it. I later learned he sent back a blistering 2-sentence response that mentioned the words frivolous litigation, premeditated fraud, and countersuit for harassment. We never heard from that lawyer again. When their direct attacks failed, they turned to the court of public opinion. My mother posted a long, rambling diatribe on Facebook. It was a masterclass in manipulation, accompanied by a soft-focus photo of me and Chloe as children dressed in matching Easter dresses. It breaks a mother's heart, she wrote, to see one of her children become so cold and consumed by money that she would call lawyers on her own family and kick her newlywed sister out of her home. We only ever wanted to give her a secure start in life. Some children, it seems, forget the sacrifices their parents make. Please pray for our family during this painful time. The comments poured in. That's horrible. I can't believe Anna would do that. Kids these days are so ungrateful. Family should be everything. My name was being dragged through the digital mud by people who had no idea of the truth. This was the attack I had been waiting for. I did not engage in the comments. I did not post an angry rebuttal. I created a single, calm, public post on my own page. It was concise and armed with indisputable facts. There is a story circulating about my family and my home, and I feel it's important to share the truth, I wrote. 10 years ago, I purchased my childhood home from my parents to save it from foreclosure. For a decade, I have been its sole legal owner and have personally funded its mortgage and extensive renovations. At my sister's wedding, my family publicly announced they were giving my home away without my consent as part of a premeditated plan to seize it for their own financial gain. When their plan was stopped legally, they began a campaign of harassment. A home is built of love and respect. A family should be too. I did not abandon my family. I simply refused to be a silent victim of their financial and emotional abuse any longer. Attached are 3 items for clarity. 1. A photo of a letter from my late grandmother, expressing her wish for me to be the caretaker of this home. 2. A summary of the over $250,000 I have personally invested in the property since purchasing it. 3. I'm also supported by witnesses who can attest to both my family's financial history and the premeditated nature of this plan. I hit post. The first comment to appear was from my Uncle Ben. I am one of those witnesses. Anna is telling the absolute truth. I am proud of her for finally standing up for herself. That single comment broke the dam. Friends who had known me for years chimed in. I remember when you were working 2 jobs to make the mortgage, Anna. This explains so much. Then, the ultimate vindication. The local architecture magazine that had once featured my house ran an online human interest piece. Local architect's dream home becomes center of family feud. It laid out the facts, quoted my post, and mentioned an unnamed relative corroborating the story. The public narrative didn't just flip, it shattered. The consequences for my family were swift and tangible. Chloe's boss, a respected figure in the local business community, saw the article. He knew me professionally. 2 weeks later, I got a text from a former co-worker of Chloe's. Heard Chloe was let go. Something about the company's ethics clause. Can't say I'm surprised. My father, whose entire persona was built on a foundation of perceived success, found his reputation in tatters. A small business loan he was counting on to fund his next big idea was denied. Their social standing, which my mother prized above all else, evaporated. They were forced to sell their manageable home and move into a cramped rental apartment an hour out of town. The performance was over, and the stage had been taken away. Months passed. The angry voicemail stopped. The silence they left behind was vast and peaceful. I took that time to heal. I hired a landscape artist to completely redesign the backyard, digging up the lawn where the reception had been held and replacing it with a serene garden of native grasses and wildflowers. I was erasing the last physical scar of their betrayal. One crisp autumn evening, I hosted a house rewarming party. It wasn't large or lavish. My guests were my true family, Sarah, David and his wife, my Uncle Ben and his family, and a handful of other friends who had stood by me. Laughter filled the rooms, real and unforced. I stood on the porch, watching them through the window, the warm light spilling out into the cool night. The house was finally quiet, not with the silence of emptiness, but with the profound silence of peace. I had learned the hardest lesson of my life, that you cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had simply walked out of the fire, leaving them to contend with their own coldness. I didn't leave my family. I had evicted the toxicity that had been living there rent-free for my entire life. They might still call me the cold sister, the bad daughter, but I know the truth. I didn't walk away from my family. I walked toward myself, and for the first time, my home felt truly, completely, and peacefully mine.